I'm from out of town, so we do that. So, how you doing, folks? My name is Tommy T, and I am an alcoholic. What fun. I'm honored to be here at the Pacific Group with you folks tonight, and I want to thank each and every one of you that shook my hand. And I could feel the enthusiasm in the room. And if you don't think your home group's the best home group in the world, you're in the wrong home group, right? So, unfortunately, mine is the best home group in the world, and that's the Decker Avenue Step Group. We meet on Monday night in Staten Island, New York. If you don't know where that is, and you come to the big city, New York, and get lost and go over the Verrazano the wrong way, you'll find Staten Island. We were the largest landfill in the world. We lost that when we closed that up. But we meet on Monday nights, and we're about 1/10 the size of you folks here. Looks like you got a serious drinking problem in this area. Huh? But if you come to that group, you'll get a warm handshake. You'll get a real bad cup of coffee. But you won't leave there. If you're suffering from alcoholism, you won't leave there without a sponsor, a new big book, and a bunch of friends and phone numbers. We're a three-legacy group. We bring meetings into the institutions. We're involved in everything we could be involved with in AA on Staten Island. There's only two things that I hope comes out of this talk tonight. One, that you understand how much I love Alcoholics Anonymous and what it's done for me in my life. Because I was not this man that's standing before you 30 years ago. But more important, I hope that there's one person that raised their hand saying they knew, that said, maybe if it works for a bum like that guy, it'll work for me too. I grew up in an alcoholic home. I was born in 1959, so grew up kind of in the 70s and the 80s, so you can just fill in the blanks. There was a lot of other things involved, but I'm a big traditions guy, and I would never disrespect our singleness of purpose here, but you could fill in the blanks. I see a lot of you my age. You know what went on. It was sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and not necessarily in that order. Live fast, die young, leave a good-looking corpse. That was our mantra. And I always remember feeling so different as a kid. I grew up in an alcoholic home, and Dad was kind of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And you never knew if Dad was going to come home and throw some money around because he hit a horse or hit a bet somewhere, or else he'd come back and just hit the kids. So you never knew what was going on, or Mom, unfortunately, Mom. So it was a tough place growing up, and it started to give me that separation that we all come here with, where we don't think we can have personal relationships with anybody, although we try. And it's always like you're faking it. The kids would ask me over their house, I would say no, because I couldn't reciprocate. I couldn't bring you over my house because you never knew what was going on. There was always EMS or firefighters or cops at our house. Me and my sister wanted to paint the curb yellow just so they'd have a clear parking spot. It was that house on the block. The lawn's a little too long in a very nice neighborhood. And we did the best we could to hide it, and grew up saying, you don't tell your secrets, you don't cry, you don't show weakness, you don't let anybody know what's going on in this house. And I always felt different with that, all through, grammar school and all that. Then a couple of guys asked me, hey, Tommy, we're going to go get some beers. You in? They were about 2-3 years older than me. I was 11. I said, I'm in. And I swore I would never be like my father. Even as a young kid, I said, I would never do that to a woman. How could you possibly do that? How could you hit your kids to the extent that you do that? I'll never do that. And I went out that night, and I'll tell the short version of the story. I just drank differently than my friends, right off the bat, right out of the gate. When we got these beers, we had to write a letter. I forged a note from my parents. It was a very trusting world in 1970. You could just go to the local deli, and they all knew your parents. So I'm like this tall, long hair, and I go in, and please let Millie have 3 quarts of beer. And it was no problem, and a pack of Marlboro. And it was funny when we were walking down to the deli, there was this one junkie in our corner, and back then junkies knew their place. They weren't on the open streets. They were in the parks. They were in the burnt-down buildings. It was very low-key. But this one guy, Glenn, he didn't care. He would steal from one neighbor and try to sell it to the guy next door. He was pretty brazen, And he said, hey, where you guys going? And we said, we're going to go buy beers. He said, drink them warm through a straw. You'll get messed up quicker. Hey, back then we followed directions, You know, some 25 years later, I come in here and a nice old timer tells me, hey, son, get yourself a sponsor, a home group, do these 12 steps. I'm like, nah, I got this, you know. But that junkie on the corner, that's my life's coach right there. I'll follow him. I'll follow him to the gates of hell, you know. And we got them. And what was different about it is these two guys, they were a couple of years older than me, but as soon as I took the cap off my beer, I threw it away. They held on to theirs. I was like, that confused me a little bit. So I grabbed my straw and I chugged it down. I was finished much quicker than them. That confused me. But then they did something that I have never done in my life. They put the caps back on their beers. And I said, what are you doing? And they said, Tom, today's Friday. We got Saturday. We got to have something for Saturday. I said, the hell we do. And I'm the smallest guy there. I push one guy. I grab his. I chug his down. And then I went after the bigger guy, which was a mistake, a little strategic error there. He throws me a beating. I wake up at like 12 o'clock at night. I'm 11. I'm supposed to be on the stoop when the lights go on. That was the rule in our town, you know. I can't even find my stoop, let alone, you know. And it's 12 o'clock. I blacked out for a couple of hours. I got a bloody lip. I'm covered in vomit. I got a cigarette burn. I don't smoke cigarettes. My boombox is missing. I'm like, what happened? What happened? That could basically tell you folks how I drank for 25 years. There was always consequences to my drinking. There was always a debacle. Maybe I'd get away with it for a while, but then there'd be something that came up. And when I got home, I took a beating like it was one of the worst ones I've taken. And while I was taking it, I covered up, and I was taking some full fists from my dad at 11. And I said, that was great. I'm going to do that again. I just can't get caught. I'm an alcoholic. I never think about stopping. You know, when you suggested entire abstinence, oh, wait, I've been through the ringer, but that's pretty drastic. Let's think about something here. And but I just could never pull that off. I won't go into all the war stories in a 38-minute talk. So, but I can tell you that I drank that way each and every time, and a lot of other things came into play. I became a thief, a liar, a shortcut taker. I never wanted to work for anything. I wanted everything given to me. I blamed everybody else for my problems because I am a professional victim. And as long as I can blame that old man, if you had a father like me, you'd drink like I do too. 16 years old, I had a grandmother who loved me. To this day, like I don't think anybody's ever loved me, except for maybe you, Shaq. And you got it. You got the adult version, so it's tougher. She was a saint. She was a religious woman and all, and she had cancer. She had her leg removed, and she was dying of cancer, and I stole money from her. And she asked me, Tom, did you take that money? And I stared her down, and I said, no, Grandma, I love you too much. I would never take that. And she died shortly after that. It's not a big horror story we hear in AA here, what we hear. To me, burnt a hole in my soul that I could never fill. I always remembered Grandma with me lying to her that way, and she just treated me with kindness and loving my whole life. That's where I was at 16. At 17, I got a girlfriend pregnant. We put that boy up for adoption. His name is Matthew. He's 48 years old. I've never met him. Burns a hole in my soul to this day. Adjustment. Thank you. You know, things like that went on. There were terminated pregnancies where I was man enough to give the money, but I wasn't man enough to go support the woman in one of the most traumatic days of her life. More than once. If you were my friend, I lied to you, I stole from you, I let you down, I didn't show up for you. Nobody was inviting me anywhere when I was drinking. And my circle of friends got smaller and smaller. It got to the worse and worse neighborhoods, and I progressed downwards. I would just keep lowering the bar for myself with everything that would happen. In 1985, a lot of my friends were graduating college and doing good things and had city jobs and all this and getting married. And I said, well, I got another girl pregnant, let's say, the order that I do things in. And I said, let's get married. The man you have standing in front of you now, he's not the man that did this, but I walk out on an 8-month pregnant woman, never to look back. And I was a deadbeat dad for 9 years. See, nobody or no love for a woman, no warning of a doctor, no mother or father pleading with me to get better. could take me away from my alcoholism. I love alcohol. I love the effect produced by alcohol. It's the only way I could cope with a life that doesn't feel right for me. Sobriety is so uncomfortable for me that I have to do something. That's where I was at back then. I think the worst 5 years of my drinking were 1990 to 1995. I was 30 at that point. I was done with the clubs. It's pretty pathetic when you're 30 years old in a club. Sorry if anybody's going to sober clubs or anything, but, you know, it was pretty pathetic to me. I'm not there drinking to be sociable. I'm not dancing. I don't care about you kids. Get away from me. I can drink alone in a very crowded bar. And that's what I was doing. And I knew there was a problem. I had already had a couple of DWIs. There was 3 or 4 arrests for minor stuff. And, you know, but I was still trying to do it and trying to control it. And that's why that 5 years was the worst. And the amount of sobriety I had, I really turned into a binge drinker at that point. But they were some binges. I mean, they went 5, 6 days, no sleep, just going at it. But depending on how bad the debacle was, that's how long I would stay sober afterwards. So, you know, like if you crack up your car, well, everybody cracks up their car in my area. You know, I mean, if you don't drink in my neighborhood, you got to move. It's bad. And so you'd stay sober for a couple of weeks. You know, I used to hang out in an old man's bar. Because the clubs weren't doing it for me anymore. Sawdust on the floor, smells of beer and urine, shuffleboard thing, you know. A quarter gets you a chicken dinner, they would call it. It was a hard-boiled egg. And that's my place. You know, sit down, drink a Jack Daniels of beer, a Jack Daniels and beer. And I loved it. I loved it. It was just, had my own seat. I was a big shot. And, you know, if a woman would come in, I'm your guy. There's 3 65-year-old guys there and me at 30. I'm going to the gym all the time. I'm looking good on the outside, just dying on the inside. And I got a little dive apartment down the street, and we'd go down. I'd be able to pull myself away from the bar, things that I can never do. Grab a 6-pack on my tab, always running a tab, right? And go down to the thing and have a romantic evening. No debacle. The woman would remember my name. I'd open the car door for her. I would drive her home or to her car. It was wonderful. And then my mind would start spinning. You're making too much of this alcoholism. You can do this. Nothing happened that night. So I'd go to that same bar stool the next day, that same Jack Daniels, that same beer, but no woman would come in. So I would go out looking for the most sordid places on earth, as Bill calls them. And in New York City, I'm sure, just like California, there's some freak shows out there. You can find whatever you're looking for. You just need the right doors to knock on. And I knew them all. And I would wake up, and it'd be Tuesday. How'd this happen? I didn't call work Monday and Tuesday. That's a problem. I'm already on probation. Feel some dollars in my pocket. Oh, I can get home. I pull out that paper, and it's 5 ATM slips. I wiped out the bank account. I'm peeking out the blinds to see what borough I'm in, how I got to get home. I look over. There's a cross-dressing dude in the bed next to me. How'd that happen? Again. You know, it was rough. So that was 2-3 months. You know, waking up with Alex was a little tough, and it was crazy times. And then that brings us to about April. I'm going to say my sober date is April 8th, 1995. So let's say it was April 6th. I went out on a 2-day bender just to have a couple of drinks with friends. Everything else got involved. I get pulled over by a 21-year-old cop down in a real rough neighborhood on Staten Island. They find a loaded handgun in my car. I didn't even remember how I went home to get it because I had trouble in this neighborhood a couple of weeks before, and I was planning on shooting a guy. I had a guy that I picked up in after hours with me next year. He's doing life for murder in a New York City penitentiary right now. They were going to try to put him to death for his crime, but he had mental illness, so they didn't do it. I thought he was a great guy. He was back at my house. You know, this is what happens to me. And you know, we got a couple of minutes, and this guy was just like me, but he kept going. I haven't had a drink since April 8th, 1995. And on one of his runs, one of his binges, just about 2 months later, he broke into his girlfriend's apartment to steal money, which is something I have done. And her high school daughter came home she was cutting out of high school, and he freaked out and stabbed her 27 times. But for the grace of God goes I, because I don't know what I'm doing when I'm like that, but I love getting that way. And I just knew there was so many problems that I have to try to stay sober. See, I could stay sober for a small period of time, to make a court appearance, to make, not amends, to say I'm sorry to somebody else, to let you into my life, to get back into their life, get back into their pocketbooks. But then I would always go back, and that's what that time was like. But the lawyers and the New York City cops and the court system and all had other ideas for me, and they mandated me to a bunch of programs while I was waiting for trial. And I was looking at a year, and this kid doesn't do jail well. I heard a guy in a conference once said, I had to do a 5 to 7 year bid. I prison well. Who prisons well? You close that door, I'm built up like that, not like you see me now. I was in good shape back then. I'm like, where's my mother with my bail? I'm freaking out as soon as that door closes. I can't do a year, so like Bill said in his story, fear sobered me a little bit. And I had to go to intensive outpatient program 5 nights a week, an alcohol awareness course on Monday nights. I've got 3 graduation certificates from that course. I'm qualified to teach it now, but it didn't do much for my drinking. But I went. I can play the game. I'll get the papers signed. Sign that, Bill, from his men's meeting. And I would do everything I had to do, but I was so uncomfortable. I didn't go to AA. I didn't take the suggestions. My first 10 months of abstinence were in an intensive outpatient program under the thumb of a probation officer and other authority figures. Finally, they started cutting back all those nights that I had to be there. And now I'm home alone in my head. Not a good place for an untreated alcoholic. I'm sure we have some people know about that. And so they said, why don't you, a guy in my outpatient said, why don't you come to this meeting with me? It's right across the street. And I went. I got to tell you, the miracle of our fellowship is when I was with you folks, I felt okay. I didn't feel so different. I didn't feel so alone. The problem was I was so afraid. 6'2", back then, 225, rock hard, in the gym every day, and I couldn't even have small talk with people. I would sit in the back row, and if the old timers started in the back row, I'd either get up and go to the bathroom or I'd leave the meeting altogether. I did not have the courage to say, I'm Tommy T., I'm an alcoholic. That's no way to live. I was miserable. I wanted to kill myself in early sobriety. I couldn't believe this is where my life had taken me. Alcoholics Anonymous. The bottom of the barrel. There's nothing lower than this. But you guys were having fun with it. You weren't just staying sober, you were having fun with it. But back in Staten Island in 1995, it was don't drink and go to meetings. You couldn't even find a big book on a literature table because there were no literature tables. You had pamphlets laid out. That was the literature table. But there was a little transition back then, or a little transformation back then, when a guy from Santa Monica, California, Joe Hawk, and a guy, Mark Houston from Texas, started to do some retreats and big book stuff on Staten Island. I just happened to have a big car, and they asked me to host those guys. And I got hooked up with a sponsor, and I went through these 12 steps, and man, life took off. It was just wonderful. And being so broken, and having that, at that time, it was almost 18 months before I asked for a sponsor and go through these 12 steps, I really wanted to kill myself. I'm grateful for that experience now. I was not grateful for it when I was going through it. If you're new here, you could make it easier on yourself by asking for help. I did not do that. But it was wonderful. And I got a guy named George. And George was a bald-headed bookie from Brooklyn, covered in tats, and he chewed a cigar that he never took out of the cellophane. It really weirded me out, you know. And he spoke to me in plain language. And a couple of the guys had given me advice. I was doing pretty well at work because I was showing up. They weren't used to that from me. And I was going for a promotion. They said, put all your arrests down. You can't lie on the thing. Let God take your career. He'll do better than you do. And what happened was I put all those arrests down and God fired me. And I was so resentful. Now you guys were the problem. and I wanted to leave AA and all. And these two guys cornered me, and one was George, and he said, "Tommy, you don't look good, man. I think you're going to drink." I said, "I'm not going to drink, man. AA's taught me enough about that. I just think I want to kill myself, but I'm too much of a coward." And he said to me, "That's kind of a permanent solution to a temporary job problem. Don't you think you're being a little dramatic?" I wanted a pat on the head. These guys back then, they did not give you a pat on the head. They told you the truth. He said, "I can promise you, you never have to feel this way again, but it's going to be directly proportionate to the work you're willing to do here. Are you willing to come to my house 2 nights a week and read this book with me? I will not tell you anything to do. We'll do what the book says." And he said, "Then I'll give you a cassette tape that you can follow up with what we've just done." And it was Joe Hawk's tape from the Salvation Army in Santa Monica. I think it's so great that I'm in this area. And that's what I did. And folks, the first time I read Doctor's Opinion, I had read that book 50 times in early sobriety. And I used to fall asleep with it on my chest because I tell the old timers, "I can't sleep. I need something in my system to sleep. I pass out. I don't sleep." They'd say, "Nobody ever died from insomnia. Read the literature." So I'd read the big book, but I read it like a story. I'm not that sharp. I couldn't even tell you the 12 steps were contained in that book. You'd think it'd be a little hint when it says, "Now we are at step 3," but no, I just glazed over it and got to the stories. I mean, it was rough. When George read that book to me, it became alive to me. We got our set-aside prayer, we read that book, and my mouth must have dropped open during Doctor's Opinion because George said, "What's up?" I said, "I can't believe they wrote this about me in 1939. He started to place my name into places, and we turned statements into questions. We did all the highlighting, the underlining, the anal retentive stuff that we do in the big book, and it was wonderful. I came into you guys either atheist or agnostic. We got to step 2. I knew there was something different about George. He was happy. I was willing to believe that George believed. That's how I went through my step 2, or else I'd still be in step 2 today, because it was in the actions of 4 through 9 that made me a true believer in God. And you couldn't shake my belief today, folks. Too much has happened. I mean, I was at a wedding Sunday, and a lot of you were there. That doesn't happen by chance. That's not a coincidence that those two are together. That is just wonderful. That's God just showing off is what that is. And we went through the 3rd step prayer. He asked me to get on my knees and hold his hands. This is a problem. We don't do that in New York. I'm like, "I don't know about that." He said, "Are you willing to go to any lengths or not?" "All right, do it." He comes off that thing. He says, "That's great. I'm glad I'm doing this with you." And he reaches down. And next, we launch out on a course of vigorous action. He's got one of those little black and white notebooks. He's like a little kid. I didn't know at that point I was the first guy he took through the 12 steps. I didn't go through with a guru. I went through with a guy that was on fire because he just got lit up. And I wouldn't have it any other way. I had 31 resentments for that alcoholic father, 29 for the mother who wouldn't leave him and save poor me. I had 96 people on that list. I finished it in 9 days. Resentment inventory, fear inventory, and relationship inventory. The relationship inventory was the toughest for me to look at. Over a period of 25 years, I had 23 substantial relationships. You know what they defined it as? You knew the woman's last name, Tom. Everything else went to one-night stands and other things, right? But I was in the same exact relationship with 23 different women, time after time again. And even a dope like me realized there's only one common denominator here, it's me. But I'll tell you, when that line in our book, that all our problems are of our own making, when you really embrace that and realize that, thank God they are. I don't have to worry about my father getting well before I can get well. I lit up. I lit up in the 4th and 5th step. It didn't take till amends for me to light up. I lit up then, man. I started just loving AA. Couldn't wait to get to George's house. 6 and 7, hey, well, we're not changing, we're choosing. Do you want to live this way or do you want to live that way? Start asking God to help you with these things. Then we get to 8 and 9, and I'm not on fire anymore. I'm afraid. I owe $138,000 to drug dealers, loan sharks, mob guys. You know, I owed a lot of other money to like institutions, but what are they going to do? Send me a bad letter? Ooh, you know, I got nothing for you to take. I'm living on my mother's couch, you know, but I couldn't get myself out there, and I started ducking George. In 10 days, I wanted to kill myself again. because now I had known the good life a little bit, and I went back to where I was. So I'm standing outside of an AA meeting with my road dogs, and a guy says to me, "Hey, Tommy, I heard you're going through the 12 steps with George. That's great." He says, "I'd love you to speak at St. Mark's Step." I said, "Of course I will, man. I'm good AA. I'll be there." And he says, "Good, we're doing step 9. I said, "Well, Bob, I'm sorry. We'll have to take a rain check. I have an 8-step list, but I haven't made any amends." He patted me on the back. He said, "It's Thursday. You got a few days. Make some amends. Let us know how they turn out." Now, my personal worst fear is that you're not going to like me, you're going to judge me, and I'm not good enough. All three wrapped into one right there. He did it in front of my friends, and my friend said, "Oh, and we'll be there to watch," and so I had to call George, and I called him, and I said, and we had to go home to call at that point, or use a payphone. There were no cell phones. And he picked up, and I said, "George, I am so sorry I haven't seen you or called you in a couple of weeks. I'm just wrapped in fear, but I really need to make some amends." And he said, "Come on over. I've been praying you'd call. I'll put on coffee." Alcoholics Anonymous. I got to use an app to get a haircut nowadays. I got to schedule with my barber. I had heart issues last year. The guy said, "We'll see you in November." November, it's August. I could die 5 times by then. But you call one of us in good standing, and I'm putting on coffee. Come on over. We have an unfair advantage here, folks, and it's one that I don't take lightly these days. I will always show up for that guy and do what these men did for me. And we reviewed the directions in Step 9, and it told us to start with our family and tell them how we're living our life now or how we see life now. So I went to my mom. I recommend starting with moms. Moms love you no matter what. I stole thousands and thousands of dollars from my mother. I pushed my mother down when she got in the way of me trying to go out. I used to do the commando crawl in my 20s to steal money out of my mother's purse when she was sick. This is the son I was. I poured it all out on the table to her. We're crying, I'm crying, she's crying. And I said, "Mom, this is what I'm clear on. Is there anything I've left out?" And she said, "Oh, you left out a bunch, son." I'm trained well. I start saying my 3rd and my 7th step prayer, and I said, "Well, please tell me." And my mother went on to say that she was so sorry for the life that I was exposed to, that she was too afraid to leave him, because he had been the only man she'd ever been with. She said, "I knew you were taking that money, son, but if it got you out of this hellhole for even a night, I thought it was worth it." She said, "When I was sick in the hospital, you were the only one to show up, even though you asked me for money while you were there." But folks, as she was talking to me, 29 resentments fell from me. I realized what a tortured life my mom had lived. She never made Al-Anon, or else she would have probably left them. But you folks gave me the integrity and the will to show up for her, and I held her hand on her deathbed. Both my parents died in 2006, 35 days away from each other. And men that had been through that before with integrity and dignity in Alcoholics Anonymous walked me through that. At that point, I was sponsoring a nurse. He told me what to do because I had the healthcare proxy. And I was there for both of those parents. The only place I could find my father to make amends was a bar, because he was getting drunk 3 times a day at that point. They had separated. And I went in and I spoke to him. And I poured my heart out. And I said, "Dad, I know I owe you a lot of money, but I don't even have a figure." He said, "It's $12,664. I have it written down in my book." The old guy's always kept a book, And I started to pay him off, and I had a sponsor at that point that told me, "You go down there. You need to establish a relationship with that man. You go every Saturday and sit in that bar with him for an hour. Give him money, under promise and overpay." And I told him I'd give him $100 a week. I tried to give $150. So for almost a year and a half, I went to that bar, and he ripped me up for, "You're not good, you're not doing good in the job, what are you doing here, this and that." One day I go in there, and my father's not there. And the bartender says, "Tommy, hold on a second, I want to talk to you." And I said, "Okay." He said, "Can I buy you a soda?" "Yeah, sure." And he says, listen, I just want to tell you, your father's okay. He had some internal bleeding, nothing big. He's got medication. He went home. He said, but I want to tell you, your father is so proud of you. And I said, it sure doesn't sound like it from what he says to me. He says, I beat him up about that every time when you leave. Give the kid a break, man. He's here every week. Nobody else is coming to see you, you old B, you know. And he said, he is so proud of you. He's bragging about you and AA to everybody in here, and all my customers are getting a little pissed at it. And I entered into a relationship with that man that I thought I would never have. And I held his hand when he died a terrible death of COPD, and every breath was his last for almost 4 hours. I'm so grateful to the men that walked me through that in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was going down to this meeting. I wanted to make one more amends, and I had a handwritten letter to that grandmother. I did not know where she was buried in the cemetery because I was too embarrassed to go to that. I went to the wake, but I couldn't go to the final resting. And so I parked my car in the section, and I'm walking up and down. I'm looking at the clock. I got to get to this meeting. Folks, at this point, it was all about having one more amend to speak on. I swear, I was not trying to do the right thing. I got to rat myself out. So I'm at the back row, and I said, I got to go. And I walk on a diagonal back to my car, and if my car was me, my grandmother's headstone was right here. I parked right next to it. It was right next to my passenger door in my car. The hair on my neck went up. I just started bawling. I took this note out, and I couldn't even read it. And it was brief. My sponsor was, he was not a real strict guy, and it was just, Grandma, I'm so sorry that you saw the kid that you did when you left this earth. Every day it haunts me what I did to you, and you showed me nothing but kindness and love. But I believe you hear me now, and I'm praying every day, Grandma, and I know that makes you smile. And I'm going to be a better man. I want you to know that, and I'm doing it with you in my heart. My grandmother was my concept of my higher power for my first 5 years in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't know what happened that day, folks, but I don't remember walking to my car or driving to that meeting or what I said to that meeting. My first recollection of that space of time was 12 guys in Alcoholics Anonymous came up to me and said, I don't know what you're doing, but don't you stop. You're a different man. So when I point back to that moment that it talks about in our big book, about that are huge emotional switches and different driving factors in our lives, that was the point. And I never looked back. I went on a tear with my amends. I mean, people were ducking me in AA. It's like, hide, Taraco's making amends. I was just pulling people out of meetings. I was going to old employees, girlfriends, everything. It was a wonderful, wonderful time. And God was with me. And you know what Corny George would do with me when I got really afraid? He'd say, open your car door. Take your school books off the seat. Invite God in with you. Close the door after. You want to put the seatbelt on him? Put the seatbelt on him. And I would do stuff like that. My neighbors must have thought I was crazy or had an invisible friend or something, And it helped me. It helped me. And we're going through it. And he says to me, don't you have to make amends to the Department of Education? And I'm like, well, I'm in the case trying to get my job back, George. I'd like to wait. And he said, and manipulate the outcome and fail, as you always have, or maybe put it in God's hands. All right, I'm going. I go see the chief executive officer of the Division of School Facilities for New York City's school system. And I wait for him, and he comes in, and I said, Jim, Tom Taraco, can I see you for a minute? He says, hey, I got your file on my desk. Come on in. I'm like, why's he got my file on the desk? He sits down. He says, what do you got for me? I said, well, Jimmy, I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm sober almost 2 years. And I'm in doing this step work, and I really owe you and the department an amends. When I was here 6 months ago to tell you about the arrest, I lied to you about everything about my name. He said, really, that's interesting. I said, yeah, it was my gun. They were my drugs. I was driving drunk, and that's my third DWI. But I have this thing called a sponsor, and he tells me I got to tell you everything. So for the last 17 years I've worked here, I've stolen time, I've stolen supplies, I've stolen money from schools, I've had parties in New York City schools, I've slept in New York City schools. And I just went off, I let it all out. And his mouth was just high. And then he said to me, that's interesting, Tom. Did you know I'm a deacon? I didn't know what a deacon was, folks, and there was no Google. So I'm just going to try to fake it through this. And I said, no, I didn't know that. And he said, yeah, I do some service upstate in a church. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, I know it took a lot to come in here and do this today. He says, we don't find God because things are good. I quit drinking a few years back through the Catholic Church, so I know what it is. He said, you get your job back, you come back here, and I'll tell you what did. I only have a couple of minutes left, and I just wanted to let you know that not only did I get that job back with back pay a few months later, I retired with 27 years in management, with that 17 years in the unions back in the day, this June, and my wife and I have been just traveling ever since. I'm living a life today that I could not believe that I have friends on the West Coast. I came here in '94. I wanted to fight all of you when I was drinking. It's a whole different experience this time out. That woman that I ran out on, my son's 10 years sober. He's 39 years old, and we're best friends. Those women that I hurt, I fell in love in Alcoholics Anonymous with my best friend, and she's sitting in the first row 18 years ago, and it's getting better every day. I love you more than I did that day, and you know I loved you good back then. I could never pay back to Alcoholics Anonymous what you folks have given me and the man that you've met that stands before you today. I have 4 beautiful children today. Cheryl came to the marriage with 3. They all call me Dad. I get some of the best cards you'd ever want to read. And I cry like a little baby. I don't know, this is only happening in my 60s, folks. All of a sudden, all these tears start coming, and I can't shut them down. I got 3 beautiful grandkids. How does this happen? My wife and I do prayers of gratitude, and we say, how did this happen? It happens because we trust God, we clean house, and we do service. It's just real simple. We just complicate the hell out of it. So when I go back to my home group, I will talk with the guys. I will flirt with the little girls, but they all look at me as a father figure now. It's not really a good role for me. But my eyes will be on that door, looking for the man and woman that came in that I know, because they're looking down. They can't hold that cup of coffee, and they think this is the end of the earth. This is not the end of the earth. This is a doorway to heaven, and that's what I've found here with you folks. Thanks so much for having me.